order for December 6th, 2022. And roll call, please, John.
Sure. Committee member Eric Cormier,
Here.
Marina Keith, Maria Lang,
Here.
David Lynn. David did note that he will be joining a little bit later, so that is not going as unexcused. Kira Pascal. Jamil Sheikh.
Here.
Mary Yen,
I'm present.
Vice Chair Pamela Baird,
Here.
and Chair Mike Kasperzak.
And also here. All right, and next is the minutes approval. And I think John sent those out for the November 1st meeting. Is there a motion to adopt the minutes? Well, I guess first, technically, is there any public comment on the minutes?
Give me 1 second to increase my screen here. Let's see. Anyone wishing to comment on the minutes, please raise your hand or hit *6. Not seeing anyone at the
Okay,
present time.
so now a motion to approve the minutes would be appropriate.
I move that we approve the minutes from our last.
Second.
Moved by Maria, seconded by Mary, was that? Okay. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, the motion to approve the minutes passes. Item 4 is upcoming agenda topics. John, if you wanted to just briefly go through those, I will note we did receive a piece of mail from a member of the public about the busking ordinance, which is not on the agenda yet. I think it was phrased as, when it comes up, please consider this. And there was another issue, I think, about Castro Street that the writer addressed. But John, any idea when these are going to start coming up?
Very good question. So let's start with at least what has been on the agenda for a little bit, which is busking and music in downtown. Your staff has been doing some research on street performers and understanding ordinances in other communities, have a lot of benchmarking on that. So I think it's very well positioned to have the dialogue. This would need to be really tackled when the phase 2 precise plan of downtown is going to be discussed. Phase 1 is going to council this evening. And I believe there will be some direction to start phase 2 quickly. So that should marry up more nicely with that, but your staff has done a lot of research in other communities that do allow it, and what are the parameters that allow it, as well as basically sound or music, what are the kind of decibel levels. So it's been a holding item, but it really would require an update to the precise plan. So it'll come back more in that time frame. So it's going to be out a few months, but there is a lot of homework that's been done to this point in time.
Okay, that's good to hear. I hadn't really known that, so that's good to know. Thanks.
Then on the Castro Bikeway feasibility, that will be coming in February 2023 to this committee. So that's actually your next meeting. You will not have a meeting in January. So the next meeting you will hear that item. And then just as kind of an ongoing topic, a standing topic, you have general maintenance and cleanliness of downtown. Last week, before the rains and more leaves falling, the parks team did a massive cleanup of the street, only to have a lot of leaves fall again. We also have been steadily removing broken pieces of furniture and things of that nature. So we are starting to, I should say, we continue to push on cleaning that up. And then another item I wanted to talk about real briefly on this is in having conversations with PD, another topic that have been brought up that is working behind the scenes has to do with the hot dog vendors that are appearing in the evening time on the weekends. And so having some conversations about what can be done There are some law changes that make it really difficult to address some of these issues. So we may need to work it more from a public health perspective. So starting to do some work on that background. At this point in time, I will certainly cede my time and ask the committee if they have any additional topics that they would like to bring back to this committee, or at least have staff start to look into to bring back to this committee.
Pamela?
Yeah, last night we went to the tree lighting ceremony, which was fun. It was nice to see it expanded into the street and have more opportunity for people to interact, et cetera, et cetera. So this is just really a question you don't have to answer. I noticed there was a street vendor outside the edge of the area that was blocked off, and this individual was selling little lighted balloon things, and of course little kids had them, and then they were tripping over them and tripping other people, but that's beside the point. So do we have an ordinance on impromptu street vendors?
We have a vendor policy that does require an active business license, as well as a vendor mobile permit, as well as providing specific insurance to operate. This is in line with the hot dog vending. There is a process for it, but to actually monitor it and enforce it is extremely difficult. But there is a process and a requirement that does require them to get a business license, as well as submit for a mobile vending permit. Oftentimes it does not happen, but there is a process and a requirement that it should be happening.
Again, I'm not against entrepreneurship. I am one myself, but I just was interested in learning more about what our policies are. Thank you.
What is the law, if I just may ask? Is that the one that Newsom passed, that all vendors should not be touched? I mean, street vendors? Is that correct? Yeah, okay. And there's no way around that, huh? I mean, like, it's just what you said from a health perspective, that's when you can address it, or try to address it that way. For the
Right, so
and all that.
One of the challenges is a business should be able to present their business license and when asked, but trying to enforce and not view it being as targeting populations is a challenge, and it can kind of conflicts with the law. So that's where we may have to take a different approach and make sure that food vendors, if they are operating, are appropriately licensed, and that may be the way to solve it. So we're having some offline conversations to see if there's a different approach.
Jamil?
I was wondering, it would
Jamil, we can barely hear you.
running again. All right.
Cannot hear.
Is your microphone? We can hear you, but it sounds like your microphone is buried or something.
It's okay now, I think.
Yeah.
Great. Sorry about that. So I was wondering that it is possible that we could post some signs up there on the street saying that street vendors may be asked for a license or something, just kind of reminder.
We could. It still is a challenge for enforcement, but that's certainly something worth to discuss. And just not wanting to get too far off the agenda topic, which is really topics for the agenda. This isn't really a chance for discussion because we didn't notice it, but these were kind of the follow-up updates. So this is under the general guise of general maintenance and cleanliness, and following back up on a prior item that was raised by this committee.
I just want to also add to that, maybe another a way to address it is via social services, because they bring their kids there and the kids are late and they're in the middle of all the bustle, they're selling alcohol out of those little containers that they carry. So I don't know, maybe that helps as well. But it's, yeah. And also they're becoming violent between each other. So now that they're territorial, and a new hot dog guy came in, I think a couple of weekends ago, and they literally broke his cart. And, basically shoved them out of their territory, like, so that he had to go to a whole nother corner.
I want to remind everybody that this isn't an agendized item, so we really
about that.
shouldn't be talking about it or doing any sort of action or direction. So it will come up at some point in the future when we can talk about it more. All right, then we will move on to item number 5, oral communications from the public, and see if there is any members of the public who wanted to address the committee about items that are not on today's agenda. And state law prohibits the committee from acting on items brought up during oral communications.
We do have a member that wishes to speak, so I'm going to allow Bruce to talk. Go for it, Bruce.
Thank you, John. I actually wanted to comment on the previous agenda item and this one. So if I might just piggyback those. I had a question about the bikeway study. As somebody who's really paying attention to what's going on there for pedestrians and bicyclists, I want to make sure that I and others understand what that is about. And I think it's about south of California, between California and El Camino, not biking in the pedestrian mall. If that could be clarified, that'd be great. And I wanted to comment on the busking thing. I know that you're going to be discussing it later, but just for your consideration, I talked with somebody who's interested in talking with outfits like Monte Carlo to see if they could use that space during their off hours for entertainment. That's an interesting idea. It used to be a movie theater, so that could be appealing for that reason, if nothing else. And also engaging the Performing Arts Committee, which my understanding, they pretty much just deal with the Performing Arts Center. And I've talked with them before about expanding their scope so they would cover things like busking and like the Monte Carlo venue and things like that. I don't really understand why they need to be confined to the Performing Arts Center. Now, on the next agenda item, I got to get to my notes, sorry. I had 3 things I wanted to mention. So one is I wanted to ask a request, and John, maybe I already sent you an email on this, but I wanted to request that in the agenda files, if you could adjust the Zoom URL so that it includes the meeting ID. City Council is doing this and some other advisory bodies are doing it too. So you could look at City Council agenda files for a model. That's a request. I've been looking at delivery bikes that are basically e-bikes with delivery functions. They're very interesting. And for the PDDs, I've talked about this before, the PDDs on the sidewalk from a pedestrian perspective want to eliminate that. So the delivery bikes out on the street seem really appealing. So I'm just bringing that up. And I'll just be one more voice saying that I don't like the way the signals have been activated at California and Castro. Boo. Okay, I'm done. Thanks.
Thanks, Bruce. Any other members of the public, John? All right, in which case then we will move on to item number 6, which is unfinished business. And item 6.1 is downtown development updates. And I think Edgar, you've got that one.
Yeah, that is correct. Good morning, everyone. There wasn't many substantial changes, actually just updated the name to one of the items there on number 17, but there is no new updates to the development list. I also want to highlight, similarly to John earlier today, we will be having the downtown precise plan go to City Council today. So that's an FYI for everyone. And a project that may be of interest to the downtown committee, even though it's not being taken on by planning, it is being done by Public Works, is the public safety headquarters. It's a CIP project which would develop a new public safety headquarters on the current downtown site. Council recently provided direction on the preferred site layout to proceed into the schematic design process. And again, this is being done by Public Works. So that's about all the information I have. Maybe John has more information on it.
Edgar, real quick question. I should know the answer to this, and I don't because I didn't read the City Council agenda. The item on the precise plan phase 1 tonight, is that adoption of a new precise plan? Is it more about scoping? Is it, what's the real gist of what's on the agenda tonight?
Yeah, so that would be an update to areas A, G, and H. If you recall, I believe I gave a presentation on it maybe 2 months ago or so, or it might have been August actually, right before we took it into Planning Commission in September. But it's really to update the design standards and guidelines. Currently, downtown has multiple guidelines, and what we're looking to do is elevate many of those guidelines into standards, mainly at trying to address activation in downtown by way of design. And as John highlights, phase 2 will be a more holistic approach. It hasn't necessarily been approved by council per se, or they haven't necessarily given us a date on when phase 2 will start, but it's staff understanding that they are likely going to discuss that in February when they're updating their goals and priorities.
Great, thank you. So I didn't mean to distract you from the rest of your report.
No, that was it. No real big updates. Usually happens around the holidays where things slow down, but I'm sure our building division, the building team will see a lot more because our building code is changing this year. So they'll be busy. Planning probably won't until January.
Okay, Pamela?
Thank you. I have a couple of questions on some of the storefront improvements, facade improvements. It seems like some of these have been stalled for a while or whatever. For example, line item number 9, that shows it was approved December 9th, 2020, and it says building plans under review. Do we know anything more about some of these? And there's no dates on them, so some of them don't have dates, so you don't really know. Like number 10, you don't know when was that approved or when did that process start, because it seems like some of these processes are so long.
Right.
Yeah, thank you for that. I can double check, particularly on the ones from 2020, but oftentimes what happens is when an applicant submits, they may get entitlements, and I know the pandemic came around, and it's been very difficult for them to get a lot of the stuff that they need to actually construct. That sometimes seems to be an issue, and then oftentimes what also seems to be an issue is if they have architects or developers that don't necessarily respond to comments, we keep getting into resubmittals, and then we that may extend it. But particularly for those that don't necessarily have a specific answer for you, but I can double check if you like. Maybe I can send you an email after this, and you can give me a list of some of the ones that you're more interested in, or I could just do a review of all the ones from let's say 2020 or so.
Well, I don't want to make extra work for you, so perhaps on the next go around, which would be in February 2023 for our normally scheduled meeting, perhaps you can give a little bit better timeframes or updates on some of these. Because you know, I hear people say, "Why you're on the downtown committee? How come nothing?" It's just like, I don't know.
Definitely. Okay, I would gladly do a scrub through of it. I know we've had a few planners who have left the city, so hopefully it's not some that are just lingering around there that haven't been updated. But yes, for February, I will do a scrub through all of this.
Okay, that would be wonderful. And then the last one is number 5, 701 West Evelyn. That's the Marwood property, and it states the formal application for the alternative parking agreement was submitted on March 9th, 2022. I know there was some potential affiliation with the Hope Street project, but I guess that one, the Robert Greene number 2, that definitely is not going to happen. So I ask you 2 questions. So let's start with number 2, Hope Street lots. That one definitely is not going to happen, right, John? The Robert Greene project.
Yeah, so that one could still happen. We are in conversations. A lot will depend on what happens in the next 3 weeks. They did lose their planning entitlement. It did expire, so they will need to refile for that. There's another complexity to their project regarding what will trigger the Surplus Lands Act beginning January 1, 2023. So there are several moving pieces in that project, and we understand they are working to get some commitments in, which if they are able to do, that project will still be able to potentially move forward in the fashion that it was envisioned. If that's not the case by the end of the year, a different path starts and the project may or may not happen after that.
So it's
And-
not dead yet.
They don't have a planning entitlement, so they definitely need to secure that. The other major milestone right now, it has to do with closing escrow on leases. And if that happens, that may avoid a Surplus Lands Act. If that does not happen in timely fashion, it will trigger Surplus Lands Act, which is a whole nother process that may result in their project not being able to move forward, or it's
Yeah.
it's a little bit
Stay
of a
tuned.
convoluted process with the Surplus Land Act.
Okay, stay tuned. And then number 5, the Marwood project on Evelyn, 701 West Evelyn.
So that one, it's my understanding, it is going forward. I think many of the projects in downtown, as John highlights, are a little bit in limbo, not necessarily because of entitlement, some of these, but a lot of these projects would likely fall under Assembly Bill 2097. Assembly Bill 2097 is no parking minimums, state law that would be in effect in January. So I think a lot of projects are holding back and really seeing how this is going to play out starting in January. So that's also, I think, holding back some of these projects. So they're taking a wait and see approach.
Understood. All right. Thank you so much.
So sort of an interesting aside that seeing the development community delaying so that new state law can have an impact, as opposed to hurrying before they fall under the thumb of new state law. All right, and
If I might just be able to state on the Nick the Greek application, they did file for an extension. They are actively trying to get that figured out. There was a sewer and water issue. So there's been significant civil engineering work that has had to be done. So that project is certainly working and is active, and have been in a lot of communication with them most recently. So they are trying to resolve a sewer water issue in order for that project to move forward, and they have submitted for an extension for their planning entitlement, which will allow them to get their building entitlement.
And is there any oral communication from the public on item 6.1?
I am not seeing any hands. Does any of our participants wish to speak on this item? I'm not seeing any hands.
All right, we will close 6.1 and item 6.2, Castro Street update. Any update? Is that you, Edgar, or is that John?
This is me, and will be a very brief update. As I already shared with you, staff has been busy doing a lot of maintenance and cleaning. The other key thing wanted to share with the committee is this week, Thursday at 4 p.m., the council ad hoc committee on the Castro Pedestrian Mall will be having their second official meeting from 4 to 6 p.m. That is this Thursday. They are discussing and getting into the functional plan. And this is something that this committee had already seen. That ad hoc committee will be getting into that topic on this Thursday. And then just to share with all of you, if you haven't seen already, a couple days ago, Kiwi Company did open their first retail location. They have been in Mountain View for a very long time, have predominantly or exclusively operated within the online arena, and this is their first retail store. It's a great store for kids. Encourage people to come down and check it out. Very interesting learning kits for young people and adults alike. That's my update.
Okay. All right. And is there any public input? Anybody in the public like to address items raised in 6.2?
Not seeing any hands.
All right, then we will close 6.2 and move on to next agenda item number 7, new business. And item 7.1 is historic preservation ordinance and register update.
So I'm promoting some individuals. So Alea with our planning team and consultants. So I want to make sure I moved over the consultant team. Am I missing anyone?
We've got Christina, Alea, and Hannah.
Okay.
Good morning.
All right. I think we're ready to go. I will turn it over to Alea to get us kicked off and start the conversation.
Right. Good morning, everyone. And this is Ella Karachian, and I'm the planning manager at the city working on the historic preservation update. The city, as you know, is updating the historic preservation ordinance and register. And we kicked off the project in summer, and it's going to be finished by 2024. We are working with our consultant, Page and Turnbull, which are present here today, to just give you a brief presentation and update of the whole project schedule, the project tasks, and everything. And we are seeking feedback from you all, and that would be great to get that feedback early in the process. By that, I will turn it to Christina and Hannah to go over the presentation.
Thanks, Ella. I have a short presentation, as she said. We're just going to go over high level what this project that we're working on entails. And then we have a series of questions on one slide at the end, seeking your feedback. You can respond to any of them. And as Ella said, we're just trying to get some early input as we start to really get into the scope of this project. So I'm going to share my screen here. And there we go. Can you see the presentation mode full screen?
No.
We're not seeing anything.
Oh, no.
Oh, here we go. How's that?
Yes.
Yes.
Got it.
Okay, great. So just to get started, why is a historic resource ordinance and register update necessary? There are a number of reasons. One is that there was an earlier historic resources survey that occurred in 2008, but there are potentially new areas and themes of significance that may not have been considered then that we'd like to consider now. There's also more properties that have become age eligible. This means that there's a threshold of 50 years that's considered for the National Register of Historic Places and the California Register of Historical Resources to be considered potentially historically significant. I know lots of people are always like, I'm 50, how can that be historic? But here we are, we're looking at buildings that were constructed in the 1970s. So we're trying to catch up to any properties that may have become 50 years old since 2008. State law, the California Environmental Quality Act, requires evaluation of potential impacts to eligible historic resources. So we're going to try to identify historic resources throughout the city that will help in that process if there are projects that require environmental review. This project will provide more clarity and certainty on what historic resources exist in Mountain View. It will include a potential designation process for local historic districts that doesn't currently exist in the preservation ordinance, and just additional clarifications and improvements of the ordinance to kind of get it up to current best practices. And so there are various sections that can be added to the ordinance and additional information to provide clarity on designation of local historic properties and review processes when there are projects associated with them, and so on. So our project involves 5 different tasks, and I'll have a slide for each of these. There's a citywide historic context statement, a citywide historic resources survey, an update to the historic register, an update to the historic preservation ordinance, and National Register nominations for select Castro Street buildings. So this is our project schedule. We started in the summer. We had a community workshop in early September. We've been working with focus groups, of which this is one. We're trying to talk with different groups that have vested interests in Mountain View into the winter. We are starting to draft the historic context statement and work on the ordinance update, which we'll be bringing to the public in the spring. At the same time, there'll be a community workshop where we'll present our findings. We will be, in the meantime, working on determining whether any properties on Castro Street are eligible for the National Register and making those determinations. And if we do find that some are, we'll continue with drafting National Register nominations. We're looking to adopt the historic context statement and ordinance next year fall. And then we'll be conducting the citywide survey, which will be wrapping up in the winter, and then hoping that all of the project will be complete by spring of 2024. So we have a lot of work to do and a lot of different moving parts, but it's very exciting. We're happy to be here and helping the city of Mountain View. So a little bit more about each of these different project tasks. Historic context statement is a history of the physical development of a place. It includes different time periods, and it's organized by themes and patterns. It's really focused on physical development of a city. So it identifies property types and requirements for historic designation in relation to those historic themes. And these documents are helpful in it's really a planning tool, so that decision-making bodies, planning staff, property owners and residents, architects, architectural historians, and CEQA consultants have a framework for understanding the physical development history of Mountain View and how to look at potential historic resources using the same baseline information. So some significant historic themes will be identified, and these include residential development, agricultural development for early Mountain View and Santa Clara Valley, commercial and industrial, transportation and infrastructure, social, religious, and cultural institutions, civic growth, technology, and innovation certainly as well. The context statement will inform other work, which is why we're doing it first. It's the basis for evaluating properties in the citywide historic resources survey that will follow. And the survey will then lead to an update of the Mountain View Register of Historic Resources. It also provides a context for the downtown commercial development to inform the evaluation and nomination of these select Castro Street commercial buildings to the National Register of Historic Places. So City Council identified the nomination of eligible properties on Castro Street as a priority. So we've added it to our scope of work. And the way that we're going to conduct this task is that we will visit Castro Street, look at potentially eligible properties, commercial buildings. We'll conduct preliminary research and determinations of eligibility based on the context developed in the historic context statement. So we'll be trying to identify if there is individual historic significance for different properties, as well as historic integrity, which means that it hasn't been altered too much and you can still recognize it from the time period of its significance. And you really need both significance and integrity to be eligible for the National Register. So that's what we'll be determining in this kind of first task. And if we do identify commercial buildings that possess significance and integrity, then we're planning to move forward with preparing nominations. And those will go to the California Office of Historic Preservation. We'll work with them to finalize the nominations. They'll need to get approved by the State Historical Resources Commission, which meets quarterly. And then the keeper of the National Register, which is within the National Park Service. Why is a citywide survey needed? The last citywide survey, as I mentioned earlier, was conducted in 2008. So it's time for an update of that information. As I also mentioned, there are more properties that are now at least 50 years old that haven't previously been surveyed, and they may possess historic significance. And we are also going to look at whether there are any potential historic districts, residential, commercial, or otherwise, other different types of properties. To conduct this, we'll be doing a two-tiered survey. This is very common for citywide surveys. We will look, we'll drive every street in Mountain View and look at all properties that are at least 45 years old. So there's a little bit of shelf life for the survey effort. Using the historic context statement evaluative criteria as the basis of evaluation, we will then create a list of properties that appear like they may be eligible as historic resources for local, state, or national registers, and then conduct an intensive level survey. We'll go back out, look at those properties more closely, conduct property-specific research, and then come to our conclusions. So in addition to those properties that we identify in the reconnaissance level survey, we'll also be looking at all properties that were documented in the 2008 survey, properties that are currently listed in the Mountain View Register of Historic Resources, as well as Area H of the Downtown Precise Plan. And that was requested by the City Planning Department. The ordinance update is another aspect of our project. This will occur in consultation with the public and city staff, as well as the Environmental Planning Commission and City Council. It will likely address criteria and designation process for local historic districts, which doesn't currently exist in the ordinance. Refinements to historic preservation incentives so that there is a benefit to being on the register. Review process for proposed projects involving historic properties, just clarifying that and the responsibilities of various review bodies involved, and clarifications and updates to existing language and process to meet best practices, as I've mentioned before. So we have a handful of questions here, and any other feedback that you would like to provide to us, or questions that you may have of us in this project. The 4 questions that we have here are: what do you value about the history and character of Mountain View? For the Downtown Association, are there any businesses that you think are significant to the history of Mountain View? We'd be interested to hear, particularly if you have specific building addresses that you could provide to us so we can take a look. What would you like to see this project accomplish? And then anything else you'd like to share about historic preservation, historic sites, the history of Mountain View, anything else that's important to you and your group. So that concludes my presentation. Actually, there's just a couple of other slides, and then we can go back to that one. But to find out more and get involved, you can contact Ella. This is her email address here. And we also have an online FAQ about the project and a community survey, which you can access at this link, mountainview.gov/historic. And the survey includes several other questions about any knowledge you have about the history of Mountain View, particular properties that we should consider for historic significance and other things. So we definitely welcome the feedback. Thanks.
So if I might ask, Christina, can I get the questions are up, but maybe it might be easier if people can see each other. So I think those are
Sure.
fairly easy questions, but if you can stop the screen share.
Let's see here. Here we go.
Mike, you're muted.
Right. I was just gonna say, if maybe those could be in a small window or something. I don't know if Zoom does that, so.
I can copy them into the chat if that would be helpful.
Yes.
That's a good idea.
Okay. Do that.
First, why don't we open this to any public input on this item before the committee begins to discuss? Is there any public input on this item?
Yes, any member wishing to speak, please raise your hand or hit *6. I see no hands at this point in time.
All right. We'll close public input and open it up to the commit.
We do have a hand, so let me unmute you, Mia. Give me 1 second. You should be able to speak, Mia.
Thank you. I was just wondering, since there are a lot of historic homes in downtown especially, but that aren't necessarily in Area H nor on Castro Street, if the planners can just speak to, because I know with some turnover and redevelopment, there have been some of those that have been plowed under, which I find kind of sad. And so I don't know how those are being addressed, if at all, as part of this effort. I'd like to understand it better.
We will be conducting a survey of the entire city. So we'll be looking at every property that is at least 45 years old, including residential neighborhoods that surround the downtown area, which often are the older neighborhoods. So we'll be considering property there for both individual historic significance based on the history that is developed in the historic context statement, as well as if any of those would be eligible as a historic district. And often historic districts can include clusters of buildings that may not be individually significant on their own, but together represent an important aspect of the history or development of the city. Often they're a little bit more modest, but again, kind of as a group, they present a significant theme. So we'll be looking at that as well.
Thank you, Mia. John, any other members of the public? Okay. We'll close public input and bring it back to the committee, and for any discussion, comments, or response to the questions that Christina has posed. I just wanted to start off as having worked on the original historic preservation ordinance in the first part of this millennium, and having it being really fraught. Christina, it would seem to me that while a lot of the information about the implications of historic preservation and having an ordinance and all of this are probably in the facts, most people aren't going to look at that. And I think it would be really helpful in presentations like this and with the focus groups is presenting what the implications of the historic preservation ordinance are, not only for the community, but also for property owners. The big hand of government saying, okay, you've kept your property so well that it's now so old that you can no longer do anything to it because it's now historic. And I think that is probably what most people think about historic preservation, not what the rights and benefits might be to a property owner, only what they can no longer do with their property. And that's not as rigid as it sounds either. So I think talking about that so people really understand again what the context is in, for the community, for property owners. So people don't immediately start thinking, well, heck, I don't want anybody telling me what I can and cannot do with my property already, more than they already can. I think will be important for people to really understand the process that we're going through, especially as, we add another 20 years of potential properties to a list, which originally was voluntary. And then the state said, oh, since we even talked about it, it's now historic. So any thoughts, comments from the committee? We always talk about wanting to be able to provide input to the city. So here's our opportunity.
Well, to your point, Mike, could you tell us what are some of the benefits of being historic? We know what the disadvantages are. What are the advantages?
Ella, do you want to field that from the city?
Sure. So we have some incentives in our ordinance, which includes as all there are some tax incentives for the historic houses that would go on the Mills Act contract with the state. That's one of the incentives. We also have some reliefs from our variance process or some kind of like a longer process of the permitting. So we have those incentives for the historic houses. We are providing some relief for them to modify their house because we know they're special. So and also some of if they need to go through the historic permit process, it's going to be free for them. So there's no fees. They don't need to pay fees for that permit process. So there are these kind of incentives right now in our ordinance. We are also looking at more options, more incentives to be included in the ordinance moving forward. And as Mike said, I think it's very important to present those to the neighborhood, to the members of the community, because as what I'm hearing right now, I have been receiving some of the feedback from the property owners about what they can do with their property in the future if it's going to be designated historic. So I think it's very important to take that a step, provide more information to the property owners about these incentives that we have.
Okay. Pamela?
Yes, thank you. So you note that a building may be of significance, and I think maybe I talked about this when we had a private conversation, but for example, what used to be the IED building, the big tall building across from City Hall, that to some people it's a very ugly building, but it does have a lot of history. It has significance in terms of the architecture and the way it was built. It was supposed to be groundbreaking as far as cost savings. So what evaluations will the city or you as a consultants be using to evaluate a building, whether it should be notified or at least recognized?
We'll be using the criteria for the National Register of Historic Resources, the California Register of National Register of Historic Properties, California Register of Historical Resources, and the city's historic register criteria. They generally all have the same thresholds and criteria, which is that a historic property can be significant in association with an important event, development trend, a singular event, that kind of thing, in association with an important person. And generally that is that there is a person that is recognized for their contributions to their career, or to society, and that the building is the best representation of the reason why the person is significant. So not the, as we say, George Washington slept there criterion, or that it is recognized for its design, architecture, the work of of a master architect, you know, that nature, architecture design. And a property can be significant for one or multiple of those reasons. Same with historic districts. So what we'll be doing in the historic context statement is outlining all of the major themes and property types and how they fit into the development history of the city of Mountain View, and then what thresholds are required for each property type within those themes based on those criteria of potential significance. And then we'll be providing significant statements with our rationale for each of those. So we'll be looking at all different types of properties, not just residential, but commercial, industrial, landscapes like city parks can be covered, objects, they can be building sites, objects, landscapes. So we'll be covering all of those things.
Now, can a property be signified as being substantial in some manner or other, but not make the National Historic Register? In other words, is there some way that a property can be identified as this has significance, but it doesn't meet all the thresholds to be categorized?
Yeah, it's possible that, you know, we'll be working on updates to the local ordinance. And so if the city is interested in having a different threshold for significance or eligibility at the local level, that's something that can be considered. Generally, the national and California registers have similar thresholds for eligibility, and a property can be significant within a local, state, or national context. So you can have a property eligible for listing in the National Register that really is just significant locally within a local context, if that makes sense.
Okay, thank you.
Other members of the committee? I did have a quick question for you, Christina. Like in the second question you had, are there any businesses that you think are significant? Are you actually talking about operating entities or business properties? You know, like, you know, people will probably say like Netscape was, you know, significant business in the history, but they're, you know, what was Netscape? What was the building? So are you talking more about business properties or more about the ethereal nature of a business?
I suppose businesses that can be located at a specific property so that there's the potential for a building to be found significant in association with the business that occupied it.
Right. Okay. So like, for example, Dog City, or the downtown, 444 Castro Street, that's where Y Combinator was, and people, so that was there. Most people don't know that, but like Fairchild, semiconductors again, but Fairchild is now gone as a structure as well as a business. So
yeah, another example is Intel. There was an early Intel, kind of a warehouse looking building from the 1960s, but that could be found significant for early Intel history. So it could be a commercial building on Castro Street that had a long-term business that occupied it, and the business itself was significant to the Mountain View community, or maybe its industry. Or it could relate to the tech industry or other things. Also, like if there's still some property that represents early agriculture or a cannery or something like that, we've identified those.
Or our old postmodern old hospital building, which is now gone, which was 70 years old or 60 years old. But Pamela?
One more question that sort of makes you think about Google, where Google is located now. That used to be Silicon Graphics, was that right?
The main campus was built by SGI, yeah.
Yeah. So so what happens if you have a property that is still significant in its current inhabitants, so to speak, but also has a history. You alluded to that on some of the other buildings, Y Combinator. So how do you determine what legacy is listed for a building?
A property can be found significant for an earlier previous tenant that's no longer there. If that business or individual is found to be significant historically.
Start thinking of all sorts of things. And then, for example, the Two Worlds development that was designed by Donald McDonald, who is a famous architect who mainly does bridges for the last 40 years, but that was a significant idea in terms of having ground space be retail and upstairs being residence. The way he designed them were very interesting in terms of sort of pods, and quite innovative when that was developed. And I think that's approaching 45 to 50 years of age. So that would be one property that I would definitely like to see be explored, as the property of Two Worlds designed by Donald McDonald. And he was quite the 30, 40 years ago. I can remember going to some of his seminars, and it was really quite groundbreaking, some of the ideas that he had in terms of architecture. So I would definitely like to see that property be at least put on the watch list if it doesn't qualify in and of itself in terms of age.
Eric?
Yeah, Christina, thank you. This is all helpful information. I guess my question reverts back to kind of some of the early commentary about property owners' rights. So a city hires a consulting agency like yours, Page and Turnbull. They run a complete analysis on all residential and commercial properties based on all the criteria you talked about. And then there are designations made. Is there any oversight over the consultant? Is there city or state committees that are overseeing your process and how you're designating what is historic and what isn't historic? I just would like to know the layers of regulation or oversight, or if there are any.
Well, the city will be reviewing all of our work, the planning department. There will also be a public review process where members of the public can review the draft documents and evaluations and provide comments. And ultimately, they'll all require approval from the city council. So there will be several levels of local review of our process or our findings. There doesn't need to be review at the state level or elsewhere. But Page and Turnbull has been around for 50 years. We're one of the oldest historic preservation companies in California and the country. And I think we are at the top of businesses that do what we do as experts. So, we'll be certainly doing our best to really vet all of the properties that we review. But again, there'll be a full public review process to provide comment.
Christina, just following up on that, could the fact that during the process you identified a property as having some sort of significance, that the council then might say, well, no, we're not going to include that? Has under California law, does the mere fact that you identified it at some point in the process give that property or bestow upon that property any significance in the future? I think, as you said, you're going to go back and look at what the city did 20 years ago, and that was a little controversial, turned out, because the state law changed on what the city had done and turned what, was a sort of a benign list of interesting properties into an official list that then people were like trapped in.
Let's see, what was your original question?
Well, it's sort of like, you know, the mere fact that you guys, as the consultants, go out and identify
Oh, what
something, does
right,
that
what
sort
happens
of
if-
ultimately make that property specialer than it might otherwise have been?
In the standard CEQA review process, properties that are found eligible for listing in the California Register are considered historic resources for the purposes of environmental review. So the city will need to decide if they, you know, if that ends up happening, that some of those properties are not listed locally, they could still be considered historic resources for CEQA purposes. That would happen already. And so what we are hoping is that with a citywide survey, individual property owners won't be required to pay a consultant like Page and Turnbull to prepare a historic resource evaluation one-off for every property that is at least 50 years old and has a proposed project that would trigger CEQA. Instead, the citywide survey will produce the results for all properties, and the city is you know, footing the bill for the effort. So there'll be more clarity at the get-go of any kind of project for CEQA, whether somebody may have an eligible historic resources on their hands. So in that way, I think it's very helpful for the general review process. Let's see, I feel like I had another thought about that, but maybe it'll come back to me. Ella, feel free to chime in too from the city's perspective.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that, so whatever the consultant is preparing, it's going to be through several rounds of review. First, internally within the planning department, then the planning manager and everyone at the city. And then also it's going to be available for public review. So we are going to receive feedback from the public community. We are going to have several workshops working with the community members, and then EPC and city council and downtown committee meetings. So we have several different opportunities to go over the document and review it, and everyone can provide input. So it's not like just the consultant giving us something and then it's going to be final. So there are different layers of review for us available at the city and also for the public.
I had one other thought, which was that there's always a tension between historic preservation and as a community benefit to maintain character, you know, uniqueness, and element of history for individual cities and property rights. And one way to think about this is that it's similar to zoning code, zoning ordinances, where, you know, there are certain review processes or restrictions on what somebody can do with a property, whether it's how tall they can build or the massing or something like that. But that if you think about it from a broader planning perspective, there are benefits to doing that. So I just read about that recently when we were taking a first pass at the preservation ordinance and looking at the State Office of Historic Preservation's guidance, and they made that comment, and I thought that's a good way to kind of frame things.
Marina?
Yeah, I would like to see, what do you do with buildings they've been around for 100 years, let's say, and only a portion of the building is actually the original portion of the original built construction? So how do you deal with those types of buildings that, let's say, you know, only some tassels are still 100 years old and the facade has been changed 3 times already in the last 100 years, let's say?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's what we call integrity. And what we'll look at is, you know, what is the reason for that building's significance? It may not be from its original construction date. If it might be from a later period based on a business that was located there, or a person, or you know, a later change even architecturally, and that change is significant, done by an important architect or something. These are just random reasons. So what is that period of significance? And then how much has the building's appearance changed since then. And if somebody from that period can go and look at the building and say, I recognize that building, it retains most of the features from that period, then we can make the argument that it possesses enough integrity to be eligible. It's really a case-by-case basis, depending on alterations that have occurred. Like for commercial buildings, you know, storefronts inevitably change over time, and there's a little bit more leniency on considering that. But what has happened to the upper portions of the facade, or is it on a street corner, and is there a secondary, you know, public facade, and what has happened there? There's a lot of different things that we think about. But unfortunately, sometimes you do have a building that has some significance, but it's just been changed beyond recognition practically, and would not likely be eligible for listing in any of the historic registers. If that's the case, the planning department or the city may want to you know, recognize the building in other ways, but it might not meet the standard thresholds for you know, within historic preservation.
Kind of like as was done with the Shockley Labs building on San Antonio Road, the old International Market or whatever it became. And so now there's a big historic designation and artistic recognition and stuff. So, because it was just an old Quonset hut.
Yeah, I actually documented that building like in 2015 or something, or 13, when there was a project, and I got to go there. It was like an apricot shed when it started out. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Marina, were you? Did you have more questions, or was that it?
Well, you know, let's say the Monte Carlo building, right? It has only what's historic about that building. The whole building is historical for downtown. However, what's recognized as to be historical at the moment is just the corner edges of the building itself, nothing else. So, you know, so you also just recognize portions of the building as historic?
It would be the full building. So then we have to consider whether, you know, what is the totality of change that's occurred over time.
Okay.
Yeah.
So can you get off that list in case it doesn't qualify? Just curious.
It won't end up on the list if it doesn't qualify.
Okay.
And if it's already listed, we'll be reviewing the properties that are currently on the local register. So we may end up, you know, making some recommendations for them to be removed if they don't actually meet the integrity requirements anymore.
Jamil.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Just to segue what Mike was saying earlier about the Chocolate Lab, there's a marker up there, and we had a program about what was there. And so I love history, by the way. I like to preserve, and there's so many different kinds of history, historical architects, buildings. But at the same time, I really believe the most constant thing in the world is change. So wouldn't it be a good idea to look at the history of it and say, this area is a historical area. There are a couple of buildings, very, very, very old, save those things so we could see that where we were, and now all the other new buildings coming up, all of them, instead of making the whole city like seems like it's stuck in time somewhere earlier and never seems to get out of there.
Yeah, no, everything that we do is really about balancing historic character and inevitable change. And you know, even if a property ends up being found eligible for a local, state, or national register, it doesn't mean that change can't happen. A lot of times, most times, interior change is, you know, not really part of historic review, and properties can be rehabilitated, adaptively reused, additions can be made, but there are just more. There's guidance on how to do that in a sensitive manner. And, you know, a lot of guiding documents out there to help be able to do that.
So just to clarify or give you some details about the process right now, some of these buildings, when they come to the city to proposed addition or modification or whatever, then they have to go through preparing the historic evaluation and extra cost. So what we're doing right now, we are kind of like doing that step for all the properties, so they don't have to go through that extra step to prepare the historic evaluation. They still can add to the building, they can modify the building, but it has to be in compliance with the California historic guidelines. And so it's not that, it doesn't mean that if a property is historic, it cannot be changed at all. It just has to, we just want to be more careful in just adding to the property and keeping the historic character of it. And just, yeah.
Other thoughts, or any response to any of the questions that Christina put up? I'll just sort of summarize, I mean, everybody, cherishes, I think, the history and wants to preserve what's going on. But then it's like, well, is that really for me? Is it for some of the community? Is it the whole community? Or, geez, a house that, well, a mayor used to live in that house. And okay, that's great, but nobody in Palo Alto cares that a mayor lived in a certain house in Mountain View. But then if that mayor went on to become president of the United States, all of a sudden that property becomes way more significant than it might otherwise have been. And so it sort of ratchets up. The more significant it gets to the community, to the region, to the state, to the nation, sort of increasing possible restrictions or preservation would be entailed. I know many people remember, and for Eric, the project that was going to be the Tide House and Chez TJ, and that got all bollocksed up in some of the preservation efforts, because got to preserve the building, even though the building is not anything like it used to be. People wanted to preserve the building, but then it got bollocksed up because it had to be preserved on the site where it was, not just to preserve the structure and move it. And so, I mean, that's sort of where, historic preservation, it really is in the eyes of the beholder, is, what really is the best place. And geez, it could just rot away because it has no, monetary value. So Pamela, and then we probably need to wrap this up. And if there's any last minute questions, because it doesn't seem like we've really responded to many of your questions, Christina, if there's anything you really had to know from the committee. But Pamela.
That was my question. Well, twofold. To point to Mike, you're also asking us to foresee the future, like the house that Steve Jobs lived in when he was a kid in Mauna Loma, or you're asking to figure out Joe Schmo lived here and Joe Schmo is going to be the president in 40 years. So let's not do anything with that house. But in any case, that was sort of lighthearted, silly question. So what can the committee do? What can other people do? I'm looking, there's more community engagement. And what specifically in terms of community engagement, not just our committee, but community engagement, are you looking to have?
Ella, do you want to respond?
Sure. Yeah, so we are taking the project to EPC study session in January and to City Council study session in February, to just go over the process, give them some details about like what we have been doing right now. We don't have any specific documents ready for review. It's just at the beginning of the process. So we want to receive their early feedback. Yeah, and then we are going to have another community meeting in spring, depending on where and when the documents, the draft ordinance and historic context assessment is going to be ready.
We're also looking to continue to do some focus group meetings, including neighborhood associations. Sounds like Ella's gotten one, starting to get one of them lined up, and has reached out to some other neighborhood associations. So
Yeah.
we're interested to hear from them.
Ella,
too.
I would reach out to the Chamber of Commerce if you haven't already. I know this has not come up on the Business Issues and Public Policy Committee agenda. And so that might be a good resource to reach out to the actual business community.
Yep,
Sure.
it's Kira
And
with the-
Kara probably being the manager of the Downtown Business Association, which probably has a higher percentage of potentially significant buildings, is probably interested as well.
Sure. Yeah, I will reach out to them to schedule a meeting. Yeah, we are meeting with Montaloma and Old Mountain View neighborhood associations, hopefully before January. Just reaching out to them and try to schedule meetings.
All right, any last minute comments? Have you gotten the earful you hoped for, Christina and Ella?
This is great. Thank you very much. And again, if you want to provide any feedback about your personal feelings about what is important to the history of Mountain View, you can go to that online survey that's at mountainview.gov/historic. And that actually is the full page of about this project. And then there's a link that's kind of highlighted for the survey. So we'd appreciate that.
Great.
Thanks.
All right. So we will end that discussion and move on to, I think it's item 7.2, which is just an update on the calendar for the coming year, John.
Exactly. So I'm bringing this back just as a quick check-in, given the conversation that happened at the November 1st committee meeting. So at that meeting, there was some conversation as it pertained to the meeting time for this committee. And at the present time of this committee deciding on the calendar, it was not clear when the committee would be going back in person. And so on November 9th, the city manager's office issued a memo stating that committees will be going back to in person. There will be a hybrid component for attendees, but as far as a committee and a body, it will be meeting in person. So this is just to circle back. I know there was some concerns about meeting time. So I wanted to pose the question to the committee just as a double check. The meeting date, I think, is set and doesn't need to change, but in light of the new information about meeting in person at 10 a.m., do you want to keep the meeting time? Does it work for most members starting February 23rd to meet at 10 a.m. in person versus 8 a.m. in person? And it's just an opportunity to daylight this and make sure that the committee has some comfort level. If there is no change, there's no action. But if you need to change the date or the committee feels that they need to change the date, I would ask that you revote on just affirming the meeting time would be the comment. And that's the end of my report.
Okay. Pamela?
I'm confused. You just said February 23rd, our first meeting in
Sorry,
is
February
7th.
2023 is what I mean.
Okay.
Basically starting in 2023.
February 7th is the first Tuesday.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was mixing. I did not mean the date. I meant the year 2023.
Okay, yeah, because in the, actually in the minutes, I didn't question that. The minutes didn't state whether it was supposed to be in person or on Zoom. So now you're clarifying whether we want Zoom or in person. Okay.
So I think there was discussion at the last meeting that while 10 can be more difficult for people running a business, earlier is there is more traffic, and it's also harder for people with parental obligations doing that. It sounded like the gist of the meeting was that 10 o'clock was still the preference. And so can I just get a show of hands from the committee? Is the majority still prefer 10 a.m. to an 8 a.m. or other time in-person meeting. These are in-person meetings now. So we're talking 10 a.m. is what we have. And are we still good with that? So if you could just raise your, go ahead, David.
I had a clarifying question. When you say optional hybrid component for attendees, does that mean as a downtown committee member attendee, I can still, I'm a teacher. And so if I can go from a conference room and get a sub, if that works, I'm good with 10.
Right, so there is some direction that from council that they want the committee members to be in person. There are times where if you're out of town, specifically out of town.
Special circumstance.
Yeah, you can make arrangements to attend virtually, but the direction from the memo as drafted by the city manager's office was that the expectation is committee members would be in person, and those from the public wishing to either join in person or virtual would have that option. So in your case, it does mean unless you were traveling or nowhere in the area, you could attend virtually, but they are really encouraging in-person attendance.
Well, and it's not really encouraging, it's state law. And the state law is that absent being out of town on a governmental purpose, you can't just, people just can't say, oh, I prefer to do it by Zoom and I want to do it by Zoom. Members, we are back to being an in-person body, and there are only special circumstances by which you can Zoom in. So for you, David, you'd have to be at the meetings.
Okay. Okay. I understand what the law is. It is problematic because I need to arrange a substitute teacher, and I'll figure out my end of it.
Yeah. I will open this to public input. I see Bruce England has his hand up.
Go ahead,
Thanks,
Bruce.
Mike. Yeah. Well, so I'm not sure where you met before and where you're going to meet starting in February. Maybe it's the chamber, and maybe you're set up for, okay.
City
So
Hall.
one of the conference rooms at City Hall. So they're not equipped at this point for public access to continue the hybrid model, so that you all are in the room and the public attends. You can attend remotely or go there in person. And I'm just letting you know, there are a number of us out in the community who are making noise about this. We want IT to gear up those conference rooms just as they've already done with council chambers, so that we can continue the hybrid approach for at least for members of the public.
If I may respond to Bruce's comment. So we have traditionally, this committee met in a different conference room. We have secured a hybrid one. There's the chamber room and one other room that is equipped to be hybrid, and that has been reserved for 2023 for this committee. Assuming it meets at 10 a.m. It can accommodate a virtual, can accommodate a hybrid meeting.
Okay, thanks, John. I'm going to ask you questions about this offline, so thanks.
So, so just doing a sort of a straw vote, if people could just indicate is not perfect, but is a majority support at 10 a.m. as opposed to another time. So if you can live with 10 a.m., please raise your hand.
Aye.
Maria, you need to vote even though you may not be on the committee any longer. It looks like we have a majority that still support the 10 a.m. in person, and people may have circumstances that they have to work out and make some strategic decisions. Okay.
Thank you.
All right, and then I think there was a 7.3 as well.
Jamil, did you have a question?
Yeah, I had quick comment. Earlier, when we used to meet in person, the conference room could accommodate the public. There was enough seats in there physically.
The room we have booked would allow for the public not a large
A
group of
few
public-
people could attend.
Yeah,
Yes.
I mean, there was a room in there in conference room we used to have installed.
Correct, but not every room is the same size. So the room we have will be smaller, but it will allow for hybrid, which will allow for a handful of in-person people. But it will not be the same room you met in, which would accommodate a larger
Right.
in-person audience.
So not plaza, but maybe.
Yeah.
Right. And we would only usually get one or two actual live human beings coming to meetings, so.
There's still no bagels and cream cheese, huh?
All right, so moving on to item 7.3, I think this was just sort of a report back, John.
It was, and if there was any questions, in light of the conversations that have been going on about what are opportunities to support businesses, what are the types of programs, this came up as interesting in getting information. So I've summarized at a high level some of the just upfront tools that are out there for businesses. And in a lot of these cases, these infrastructure upgrades, improvements generally do require a group of people voting to tax themselves, is the high level conversation. But when you tax yourselves, that allows you to use those funds to do certain things or reinvest in the business. There are some other business programs that are out there that could be launched, but this was just a way to kind of memorialize and share with people the different types of programs that are out there or available today to potentially implement should there be a willingness among people. And in some cases, these already exist. There is an existing BIA in Mountain View today, and those funds are used to promote and market the downtown. And that is exclusively how that is used. So you could have a business improvement district, which is more focused on maintenance of the area and beautification of the area. So there are tools out there. We can certainly agendize this if you want to get into a bigger topic, but the goal of this was to provide you with some of the tools that are out there and available to businesses. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Pamela?
Yeah, I just want a clarification, please, on the first building improvement infrastructure, enhanced infrastructure financing district. And it says the city of Mountain View's portion of property tax is approximately 16% of the 1%. Can you clarify what that means, please?
Yes, so we're getting a fraction of a fraction. So instead of, say, getting $1, what we would normally get as a $1 share of property tax, we're only getting 16 cents of property tax. So that's true of sales tax. So in property tax, when you pay however big your property tax bill, of that total tax bill, what the city gets is 16% of that bill. The rest of it goes to the county, to schools, to bonds. So there's a big misconception about what the city actually gets in property tax. So even though you may write a big check in property tax, the city only gets 16% of what you pay. So when you do an EFID or some of these other financing districts, you're only focused on the 16% that the city gets is what is meant by that.
Okay, seeing no further questions, we'll close item 7.3, move on to item 8, which is just any council comments, questions before we adjourn.
I had some just very quick updates that I would like to share with.
Oh, sure.
the
Sorry,
group.
John.
So very quickly, the appointment review committee, council appointment review committee did hold interviews that occurred on November 21st. And I did want to share their recommendations in case this group was not familiar with it. Marina, David, and Kira were all recommended for reappointment. A new person coming on, Money Singh, for the representing the downtown property owner, business owner was recommended. A new member for community at large, Ann Kavanaugh was recommended. Your chair was recommended for reappointment, and Jamil was also recommended for reappointment. So council will need to approve those, but that was the recommendations from the committee. And then finally, I wanted to just acknowledge and thank Maria and Eric for their service to this committee. Greatly appreciate it. I have not worked with you a long time, but certainly appreciate the service you've given to this committee, and really want to thank you for the time and commitment to this committee, and really appreciate it, and thank you.
And remind you both that you can always zoom in to our meetings in the future and provide more pithy comment.
Will do.
I think Jamil had a
Jamil?
No, sorry,
Oh, okay.
no, no, my hand is still up, sorry.
Yeah, there you go. Okay, seeing no other comments, we will adjourn the meeting, and we will, one, have a great holiday season. Lots coming up between now and our next meeting in February.
Actually, I have one thing I want to announce, which
Oh.
is 2 downtown campaigns will be happening. On December 17th, we're going to have a Santa-thon. And if you dress like Santa, there are going to be 19 different businesses you can go to, and you can get a treat or a discount, but you have to go to them to find out what they are. And the other is the Great Elf Hunt, which also launches on the 17th. And it goes from December 17th to January 3rd, 2nd or 3rd. Anyway, the way that this works is it's like a scavenger hunt. You have to find the elves. And when you find the elves, you can post them onto social media. There are 19 businesses participating. If you put at least 8 up there and you tag the DBA or put a story up, you'll be entered into a raffle or a drawing. It has to be a drawing, can't be a raffle. So you'll be entered into a drawing. And with that drawing, you can win prizes. And the prizes are shoreline tickets, a deluxe stay at the Shashi Hotel, or a dinner at Cascale, and also gift baskets from local businesses. This is also a really important time to support local businesses, because after Christmas, often business kind of goes off a cliff. And so one of the things we're really trying to do is make it fun to come in. And many of these elves will be having mystery offers themselves. And so if you go and find an elf, not only can you post on social media, but it might tell you a secret. They can get you 25% off your drink or your latte.
What's the timing of the Santa-thon? And that's on a
Santa-thon
Saturday?
is 2 to 6 p.m. and that's on the 17th. Participating businesses will have maps in their windows, and there's also going to be a map on our website too.
And that's just show up. It's not something you have to register for or anything.
Nope, you show up, you just have to have some kind of jolly accessory. It can be a Santa hat, elf ears, reindeer, antlers, whatever you would like, but you need to have something, and then you'll get something special in return.
What's the social media tag for DBA, please?
I'm gonna have to put it up there. It's on the poster because I know the other one. So I'm gonna go there. It's at DBA MV.
Thank you.
Actually, Kara just answered the question. I was wondering if a person could just wear a Santa hat, if that was significant enough to be a Santa.
That is significant enough.
Okay, thank you.
And
What I
so
will
it'd be a
also
red
do
hat and a red
is,
jacket.
where there's going to be posters up, what I will also do is I'll send the flyer and the maps to the chair of the committee and to John, so they can also send that to all committee members. So you can have that as well. We really appreciate you also promoting this too to your networks, because it will be a fun activity to do.
All right. Well, with that, we will adjourn the meeting until February, whatever, 2023.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Merry
Great
Christmas,
holiday.
guys. Or holidays.
Happy holidays. Merry Christmas.
Bye.